True power is found not in controlling the world outside, but in mastering the world within. Imagine for a moment that you stopped waiting for life to happen to you. What if, today, you decided to take radical ownership of every choice, every action, every moment? How different would your life look a year from now if you stopped handing away your power? If you are done drifting, it is time to take the wheel. It is time to subscribe, not to a channel, but to your own discipline, your own clarity, your own growth. There is a comforting story we tell ourselves, that success belongs to the gifted, that some are born with a spark the rest of us can never possess. We imagine their lives were written in the stars, while ours were left to wander in the dust. But this belief, if you look at it closely, is nothing more than a beautiful illusion. It is a story we whisper to ourselves to excuse our own inaction. The Stoics knew that talent is a pale force compared to discipline, and discipline is available to all. A seed, no matter how rare, will never grow if it isn't planted and nurtured. The same is true of the potential within you, and this illusion is dangerous, because it becomes a cage. When we believe that talent is destiny, we surrender before the battle has even begun. Think of how many times you've seen another's success and dismissed it as luck, as a gift you were not given. That thought feels safe, doesn't it? Because if success is merely a lottery of birth, you are not accountable for the work you have failed to do. You trade the possibility of growth for the comfort of surrender. But greatness was never born from comfort. As Seneca said, luck is what happens when preparation meets opportunity. Those who seem lucky are merely those who prepared, often for years, while the world looked away. We speak of accountability when life is calm, and the word sounds noble, strong, but its true weight is felt in the quiet moments, in the pre-dawn darkness when the alarm rings, in the solitary grind when no one is watching. In those moments, try an exercise. Call it the mirror test. Imagine laying out your entire week, hour by hour, before someone you deeply respect. No filters, no excuses, just the raw truth of how you spent your time. Could you meet their gaze with pride, knowing your actions aligned with your ambitions? Or would you shrink from the reflection, stung by the realization of how much of your life was given to distraction, to delay, to things that do not truly matter? This test is not about the judgment of others. It is about whether you can look at yourself without flinching. For time is the currency of your life. And as Seneca also warned, it is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste much of it. The mirror shows no mercy for our intentions. It doesn't care what you said you would do. It only reflects what you did. And in the gap between the two, we find our excuses. I don't have time. I lack support. The conditions aren't right. These are the most convincing lies we tell ourselves, for they wear the mask of reason. But they are thieves. With every excuse, you hand over your power, trading responsibility for the fleeting comfort of blame. These excuses build a prison. You forge the bars, you lock the door, and then you lament being trapped. But, as Marcus Aurelius knew, you have power over your mind, not outside events. To realize this is to find strength. Freedom, as Epictetus taught, belongs to the one who is master of himself. True accountability is the act of looking inward. It is the awakening Carl Jung spoke of. Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes. This awakening is painful, for it strips away the illusion that others are the cause of your stagnation. But in doing so, it returns your power. If you are responsible, you also have the power to change. At first, this accountability feels like a crushing weight, a lonely burden. but you cannot grow strong without resistance. Over time, that weight forges you. The small acts of discipline, the workout you start, the promise you keep, build an unshakable trust in yourself. The burden transforms into a foundation. What once felt like chains become the very structure that holds your life together, allowing you to stand firm in any storm. The illusion of talent fades, and you see that what you admired in others was never magic. It was effort stacked on effort, day after day, in silence. It was built, not born. And so the final question is not whether you were gifted. It is not whether the path is easy. It is simple, and it is piercing. When no one is watching, when the applause has faded, when it is only you and the choice before you, will you act? Greatness is not a gift. It is a responsibility. And that journey begins now. There is a subtle yet profound distinction that we so often forget. A distinction that can determine whether we move forward in life or remain hopelessly stuck. It is the difference between shame and disappointment. Shame is a venomous whisper, insisting that you are broken, that something is wrong with you at your very core, that you will never be enough. Disappointment, on the other hand, offers a simpler, cleaner truth. You merely fell short this time. Shame is a heavy, paralyzing weight. Disappointment, though uncomfortable, can be the very spark that ignites growth. And yet most of us confuse the two. We punish ourselves when we should be learning. We drown in self-pity when we should be adjusting our path. The Stoics would remind us that our mistakes are not proof of our worthlessness, but opportunities to refine our character. As Marcus Aurelius wrote, "If you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it. And this you have the power to revoke at any moment." Shame takes a mistake and interprets it as proof of your inadequacy. Disappointment takes that same mistake and sees it as a lesson. The event itself does not change. It is your judgment of it that determines whether you will crumble or grow stronger. Think of a child learning to walk. They fall, they stumble, they cry, but no one shames them for it. The fall is not seen as evidence that the child is broken. It is seen as proof that they are learning, and because they are not crushed by the weight of shame, they simply try again. In time, they walk, they run, they explore the world. Now, consider how harshly we treat ourselves as adults. One failure, one missed opportunity, one rejection, and we collapse into shame, convincing ourselves that the fall means we are unworthy. But what if we looked at ourselves with the same patience we offer a child? What if we allowed disappointment to be the guide that pushes us forward, instead of letting shame chain us to the ground? Carl Jung once wrote, "I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become." Shame keeps you trapped in what happened. Disappointment opens the door to what can still be. This distinction is vital because if you confuse accountability with shame, you end up punishing yourself instead of growing. The Stoic way is not self-condemnation, but self-examination. You do not deny your errors, but you refuse to make them bigger than they are. You look at them clearly, ask what they reveal, and then decide what to do differently next time. Disappointment, in this way, is a form of hope. To be disappointed means you still care, that you still hold a vision for something better. Shame, however, robs you of that vision. It convinces you that no matter what you do, the outcome will be the same, and so you simply stop trying. As Epictetus said, "It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." Shame locks your reaction in despair. Disappointment, when met with courage, sharpens your response and prepares you to act more wisely. Of course, disappointment can still be painful. To fall short of your own expectations stings deeply. But the Stoics embraced this sting as something useful. Pain is information. It shows you where to focus, what to improve, what needs to change. Shame numbs you, telling you not to even try, because you are doomed to fail. Disappointment keeps you awake, reminding you that you are capable of more. It keeps you restless in the pursuit of your better self. This is why the highest achievers often live with a quiet sense of disappointment. They hold themselves to exacting standards and constantly see where they could do better. But instead of letting that awareness curdle into shame, they use it as fuel. It is what pushes an athlete to train harder after a loss, what inspires an artist to refine their craft after a weak performance, what drives a thinker to keep questioning after being proven wrong. In this way, disappointment becomes a tool for resilience. Seneca advised, "A gem cannot be polished without friction, nor a man perfected without trials." That friction is disappointment. It is the resistance you feel when you face the gap between where you are and where you want to be. Shame tells you that gap can never be crossed. Disappointment tells you the gap exists for a reason, so you can learn how to bridge it. Without friction, without falling short, without that ache of dissatisfaction, there is no refinement. There is only stagnation. So the next time you stumble, pause and ask yourself, am I drowning in shame, or am I sitting with disappointment? If you find yourself telling a story about being broken, unworthy, or incapable, that is shame, and it will keep you trapped. But if you can feel the sting without building an identity around it, you give yourself permission to move forward. Disappointment says, "This is not the end. This is feedback. Adjust and try again." The difference is everything. Shame is a weight that presses you down. Disappointment is a weight that strengthens you when you learn how to carry it. And the choice between the two lies not in the event itself, but in how you decide to see it. Remember this: falling short does not mean you are broken. It means you are human. And if you choose to see clearly, every disappointment can become the stepping stone that leads you closer to the life you were meant to live. Whenever life pushes back against you, the most powerful thing you can do is also the most uncomfortable. You must ask yourself, how is this my fault? At first, those words feel like an attack, as if you are being asked to take the blame for things that were clearly not your doing. Most people prefer to see themselves as victims of circumstance. It is far easier to say, "This happened because of them," or "The system is unfair," than to ask what role we played in the outcome. But the moment you shift your attention from the external to the internal, you reclaim something essential: the ability to change. The Stoics were clear on this. Epictetus taught, "We cannot choose our external circumstances, but we can always choose how we respond to them." Asking, "How is this my fault?" is simply another way of asking, what part of my response could I have controlled but didn't? Think about a mistake at work, a failed relationship, a missed opportunity. It is tempting to explain them away by highlighting what others did wrong. But when you take that route, you learn nothing, because the power remains in someone else's hands. If instead you ask what you could have done differently, you begin to see possibilities. Perhaps you didn't prepare as thoroughly as you could have. Perhaps you avoided a difficult conversation until it was too late. Perhaps you ignored warning signs because you did not want to face the discomfort. These realizations sting, but they also light the way forward. Blame only chains you to the past. Responsibility unlocks the door to growth. Carl Jung wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." When you refuse to ask the hard questions, your blind spots run your life. You end up repeating the same mistakes over and over, calling it bad luck. But when you ask, "How is this my fault?" you shine a light into those hidden corners of yourself. You begin to see patterns of avoidance, of weakness, of fear that have quietly shaped your choices, and once you see them, you can no longer pretend you are powerless. The illusion of fate fades, and the reality of choice stands before you. The reason this question feels so terrifying is that it removes all excuses. If you can always find some way that your actions contributed to the outcome, then there is no safe place to hide. That is a hard truth, but it is also liberating. Because if there is no safe place to hide, there is also no cage holding you down. You are not doomed to repeat the same cycles forever. You can adjust. You can learn. You can grow. Of course, this is not about self-blame in a destructive sense. You are not meant to berate yourself for everything that goes wrong. Life will always bring storms you did not create. Loss, betrayal, accidents. The point of the question is not to assign guilt where it doesn't belong. It is to discover where your influence could have been greater, where your choices shaped the outcome, and how you might respond differently in the future. It is about responsibility, not punishment. Responsibility isn't about what's fair. It's about what's useful. And asking how something is your fault is supremely useful, because it always reveals where you have the power to act. The greatest leaders, thinkers, and creators all share this ability to ask the hard question. They do not waste years nursing old wounds or pointing fingers. They ask, what part did I play, and how can I play it differently next time? This mindset transforms failure from an enemy into a teacher. It makes setbacks part of the path forward, instead of detours that leave you lost. So when life breaks against you, when you lose the job, when the relationship fails, when the opportunity slips away, pause and ask the hardest question. Not to tear yourself apart, but to piece yourself back together more wisely. Ask, what was within my control that I ignored? Where could I have acted differently? What choice did I avoid making because it was uncomfortable? The answers are rarely easy, but they are always valuable. Because they reveal that even when life feels overwhelming, you are never completely powerless. In the end, the hardest question is also the most freeing one. It challenges you to stop seeing yourself as a victim and start seeing yourself as a participant in your own life. And when you accept that role, everything changes. You stop waiting for others to fix things. You stop resenting the world for being unfair. You take ownership of your failures and your future. And slowly, the same question that once terrified you becomes the one that strengthens you. How is this my fault? Taking control of your life is never free. It comes with a cost, an emotional tax collected not in money, but in effort, sacrifice, and brutal honesty. It costs you your comfort, because comfort thrives in avoidance. It costs you your excuses, because excuses dissolve the moment you stand accountable. And it costs you the luxury of pointing fingers, because ownership leaves no room for blame. These costs feel steep and at times isolating. But the truth is, what you gain in return is far greater than anything you lose. You gain the ability to trust yourself, and with that trust, you stop drifting as a passenger in your own story and sit in the driver's seat, fully aware that every choice you make carries weight. That awareness can be unsettling at first. When you accept ownership, you can no longer pretend that your circumstances are random or dictated solely by others. Every decision becomes meaningful. Every action becomes a vote for the person you are becoming. As Marcus Aurelius reminded himself daily, it is not external things that trouble us, but our judgments about them. To own your judgments is to accept that the quality of your life is not determined by the storm around you, but by how you choose to navigate it. Once you take that truth seriously, excuses no longer hold the same appeal. You begin to see them for what they are, escape routes that lead nowhere. But here lies the paradox. The cost of ownership is heavy, and yet, without paying it, you carry a weight that is far heavier. When you refuse ownership, you pay with regret, with doubt, with the quiet, gnawing sense that you are betraying yourself. The momentary relief of blaming others or retreating into excuses always comes back with interest, in the form of wasted time and lost potential. As Seneca wrote, "While we waste our time hesitating and postponing, life is slipping away." Ownership is costly, but hesitation is ruinous. The choice is not whether you will pay. It is whether you will pay in the currency of discipline now, or in the currency of regret later. Carl Jung observed, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. Ownership is the price of that privilege. To become who you are meant to be, you must first accept that no one else can walk your path for you. No one can carry your burdens, make your decisions, or choose your habits." That realization can feel overwhelming, but it also brings profound clarity. The moment you claim everything is yours, your failures, your flaws, your victories, you realize that the life you want is not waiting for someone else to deliver it. It is waiting for you to build it through deliberate action. The emotional tax of ownership often shows up as loneliness. When you start holding yourself to a higher standard, you may notice that not everyone around you is willing to do the same. Some may mock your discipline, others may resent your refusal to play the old games of blame and excuses. But ownership requires you to prioritize your growth over their approval. As Socrates said, to find yourself, think for yourself. Ownership means daring to think for yourself, even when it leaves you standing apart from the crowd. That separation is part of the cost, but it also becomes a source of your strength. Another part of the cost is a brutal awareness of your own limitations. When you can no longer push responsibility onto others, you are forced to see clearly where you have fallen short. This can be painful, but it is also freeing, for it is only when you acknowledge your weaknesses that you can begin to strengthen them. Aristotle wrote, "Knowing yourself is the beginning of all wisdom." Ownership is that knowledge in practice. It strips away illusion and forces you to meet yourself with unflinching honesty. And while that honesty can wound, it also heals, because it gives you solid ground from which to rise. The longer you live with ownership, the more you realize it is less about perfection and more about consistency. You don't take control of your life in one dramatic act. You do it in the small, often invisible choices you make every day. Choosing to finish the task instead of leaving it undone. Choosing to take responsibility for a mistake instead of covering it up. Choosing to improve a little each day rather than waiting for a perfect opportunity. These choices compound, and over time, they transform not just what you do, but who you believe yourself to be. Slowly, you become someone you can trust, someone who does not break their own word. And that self-trust is worth more than comfort, more than excuses, more than blame. The cost of ownership will never disappear. Every day you choose it, you pay in effort, honesty, and discipline. But in return, you gain a kind of freedom that cannot be taken from you. You gain clarity in your direction, strength in your actions, and quiet pride in your character. You stop being the passenger who complains about the journey and become the driver who steers with intention. And once you experience that freedom, you realize that the price you paid was not a burden. It was an investment. In the end, the real question is not whether ownership is costly, but whether you are willing to trade your comfort for your potential. The emotional tax is real, but so is the reward. To own your life is to carry weight, yes, but it is also to stand tall under that weight, knowing it is shaping you into someone stronger, clearer, and more alive. And that is a price worth paying. When you truly begin to hold yourself accountable, something subtle but powerful shifts inside you. At first, it's just about your own life. Waking up when you said you would, following through on your commitments, taking ownership when things go wrong. But over time, This discipline changes not just how you see yourself, but how you see the world. You find your tolerance for weakness diminishing, not because you want to judge or belittle anyone, but because you understand what it costs to rise. You know the weight of responsibility. You know the pain of pushing past excuses. You know the discipline required to climb out of comfort and into growth. And once you've paid that price, you can no longer look at avoidance or mediocrity in the same way. It isn't judgment. It's recognition. The remarkable thing is that people notice this shift, often without you saying a single word. When you hold yourself to a higher standard, others feel it. They see it in your actions, in your consistency, in the quiet way you live what you preach. This is why ownership is contagious. It spreads not through lectures but through example. And this is why becoming the standard matters so much. The world doesn't change because we demand more from others. It changes because we demand more from ourselves. When you raise your own standard, the people around you often begin to mirror it. A friend starts rethinking their own excuses because they see you choosing discipline over distraction. A colleague works harder because your consistency quietly raises the bar. Even within your family, your example sets a tone that words alone could never achieve. Leadership, in its truest sense, begins here. Not with authority, but with ownership. Of course, becoming the standard carries its own cost. Some people will resist you, some will criticize, others may pull away. Accountability can feel threatening to those who are not ready to face themselves. But here again, the Stoics offer clarity. Epictetus said, "Don't explain your philosophy. Embody it. If your standard unsettles others, let it. Your role is not to lower yourself for their comfort, but to live in a way that calls them upward. You cannot force anyone to rise, but you can refuse to step down. And in time, the very people who once resisted may begin to admire or even follow the path you've chosen. When you take responsibility, when you awaken to your own power, you become more than just another person drifting with the crowd. You become a standard, a measure against which others naturally weigh themselves. This does not mean perfection. It means honesty, integrity, and a refusal to abandon the responsibilities that make life meaningful. Awakening is not about doing everything flawlessly, but about facing life consciously, without excuses or illusions. The more you embrace this, the more you realize that responsibility is not only personal, it is social. Your actions ripple outward. By living with ownership, you unconsciously give others permission to do the same. When they see you holding yourself accountable, they begin to wonder what might be possible if they did too. In this way, you don't just change your own life, you begin to reshape the culture around you. Seneca once said, "Associate with people who are likely to improve you." When you become the standard, you are that person for others. You are the one whose presence lifts rather than drags down, whose example pushes rather than excuses. And yet, the work never ends. Becoming the standard isn't about reaching a destination where you are beyond failure. It is about staying committed to the path, especially when it is difficult, especially when it feels lonely. The higher your standard, the more clearly you will see your own shortcomings. But that is part of the process. It keeps you humble. It keeps you honest. And it keeps you moving. As Aristotle wrote, "We are what we repeatedly do." Excellence, then, is not an act, but a habit. Becoming the standard is not a single achievement. It is the habit of excellence, practiced day after day in ways both small and great. In the end, this is the heart of ownership. It begins within you, but it doesn't stay there. It spreads into your work, your relationships, your community. It shapes the way others see themselves, often without them even realizing it. If you want a better world, it begins with a better you. It begins not with a proclamation, not with a demand, but with the quiet, consistent choice to inhabit a higher version of yourself. It is the decision to hold yourself accountable in the silence when no one is watching, to awaken to your own responsibility, and in doing so, awaken others. To become the standard is not to place yourself above anyone, but to align yourself so deeply with your own truth that your very existence becomes an invitation. Your life is shaped not by what happens to you, but by the ownership you choose to claim. The moment you release your excuses and begin to bear the full weight of your own life, you reclaim a power that was always yours. That choice is seldom easy, but it is the only path to freedom, to clarity, and to unshakable strength. So, let today be the day you rise. Have you ever paused to consider that what we have been taught to call love might be little more than a fear of being alone? That the deep-seated need for a partner is a beautiful disguise for the terror of facing the emptiness within? What if the relationship you cling to is just another room you've run into to escape the sound of your own footsteps in the hall? Nothing reveals us to ourselves more than the discomfort we feel in solitude. The Stoics urged us to practice a sobering thought exercise. Imagine yourself on your deathbed. The room is still, the air is heavy, and the sum of your life is pressing down on you. In that final, lucid moment, you must ask yourself, did I live my own life? Or did I merely exist in the shadow of another's? They warned us against surrendering our inner citadel, reminding us that the chains we accept willingly are always the hardest to break. We dress these chains in the finery of romance and companionship. We call them completion. But deep down, something burns. A quiet, persistent whisper that you were meant for more than this. If you have ever felt that whisper, if you have ever sensed a truth hiding just beneath the surface of your connections, then you know this conversation is for you. Most people don't fall in love from a place of wholeness. They fall into it because they are terrified of the silence that awaits when the noise of the world finally stops. The kind of silence that forces you to hear your own thoughts, to confront the questions you've been avoiding for a lifetime. There is an empty space within them, a void that feels too vast, too echoing, too raw. And so they fill it with another person, not always because they deeply desire that person, but because anyone is better than facing themselves. We rarely speak of this, but so much of what we call love is a beautifully dressed form of avoidance. It is far easier to become lost in someone else's stories, emotions, and needs than it is to confront the unwritten chapters of our own. As Carl Jung wrote, loneliness does not come from having no people around you, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important to yourself. For many, a relationship is not a bridge to true connection. It is a shield against that profound loneliness, a way to pretend they are understood, even when they have never taken the time to understand themselves. The problem is, when love is rooted in fear, it is condemned to be fragile. Every disagreement feels like a threat to survival. Every moment of distance feels like a crack in the foundation. The relationship is burdened with the impossible task of holding together not just two lives, but all the unresolved fears of each person. And when those cracks inevitably appear, panic sets in. People cling harder. They negotiate away their values, silence their desires, and bend themselves into shapes that don't fit, all to keep the other person from walking away and leaving them alone with the very silence they have been running from. This is not love, it is a survival tactic. This is why so many people lose themselves in relationships without ever realizing it. The process is subtle, almost invisible at first. You compromise on small things, where to eat, what to watch, how to spend a weekend. It feels like partnership. But then the compromises grow. You hold back opinions because you know they won't be understood. You stop pursuing dreams because they create tension. You begin adjusting your very personality, not out of a desire for growth, but out of a fear that being your full, unfiltered self might cost you the relationship. Over time, the person you once were becomes a stranger, even to you. Marcus Aurelius reminded us, "It is not death that a man should fear, but he should fear never beginning to live." And this is the quiet tragedy. So many stop truly living the moment they become afraid of losing someone. When the foundation of your connection is fear, it robs you of the very thing true love is meant to grant: freedom. A healthy love should make you stand taller, not shrink to fit. It should amplify your individuality, not erase it. But when fear is in control, love becomes a contract of unspoken conditions. Don't be too much. Don't change too fast. Don't disturb the delicate balance, even if that balance is slowly suffocating you. The irony is that the silence you're running from is not your enemy. It is your greatest teacher. In solitude, the noise of expectation fades, and you begin to hear your own voice again. At first, it is uncomfortable. You hear the echoes of doubt, fear, and regret. But if you can stay with it long enough, another sound emerges, the clear tone of your values, your calling, your unshakable truth. As Jung said, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. You cannot undertake that journey if you are constantly drowning in someone else's presence, if your every thought is calibrated to keep the peace rather than to find your own center. The fear is rarely about losing the other person. It's about losing the distraction they provide. When they are gone, you are left with yourself. And for many, that is the most terrifying encounter of all. But it is also the encounter that changes everything. Because once you can sit in your own silence without needing to escape it, you stop depending on others to make you feel whole. You stop trading your identity for the comfort of belonging. You begin to love by choice, not by necessity. And that is a love that cannot be broken by absence or distance, because it is not built on fear. It is built on freedom. From the moment we can understand words, a story is woven into the fabric of our minds. It arrives in bedtime tales, in films, in the hushed tones adults use when they speak of life. The script is simple. You grow up, you find someone, you fall in love, and you settle down. This is painted as the final destination, the chapter where all loose ends are tied. Few ever stop to ask what happens after the screen fades to black, and fewer still dare to question if this script serves everyone, or if it silently robs us of the chance to meet the most important person we will ever know: ourselves. This conditioning is insidious. It lives in the casual questions from relatives. When are you going to find someone? As if your life is merely a waiting room for another's arrival. It shapes how we behave. If you've been taught that your worth is tied to being partnered, you will endure conditions that harm your soul just to avoid the perceived failure of being alone. You will ignore red flags, tolerate disrespect, and contort your spirit into someone else's ideal rather than risk the quiet judgment of an empty room. As Marcus Aurelius observed, it is not things themselves that disturb us, but our judgments about them. The judgment here is crushing. Alone equals failure. Together equals success. This false equation keeps countless people trapped in lives that are not their own. Breaking free from this invisible conditioning does not mean rejecting love. It means refusing to let the fear of being alone write your story. It means choosing to know yourself so deeply that when you do decide to share your life, you are not seeking a partner to complete you. You are inviting them to walk beside you on a path you have already forged yourself. That is a connection no conditioning can manufacture, for it is born not of fear, but of freedom. The slow disappearance of the self doesn't happen in a single dramatic moment. It is a quiet erosion, a series of 1,000 tiny concessions. You skip something you love because it doesn't fit the plan. You soften an opinion to avoid friction. You tell yourself this is maturity, that this is the price of connection. But there is a line between adapting and erasing, and when that line blurs, you may not realize which side you are on until it is far behind you. Rarely does someone explicitly ask you to disappear. Instead, you offer yourself up, piece by piece, in the hope of preserving the bond. You believe love is maintained by sanding down your sharp edges, by becoming easier, more agreeable. But a relationship built on a partial truth cannot stand. As Seneca wrote, "He who is brave is free," and freedom, in its truest sense, is the courage to exist fully, without constant self-editing. Love that demands your absence is not love at all. It is a contract for slow self-abandonment. The greatest gift you can bring to any relationship is the fullness of who you are, unshaped by fear. The moment you stop disappearing for the sake of another's comfort, you stop trading your life away, and you begin to live it as it was always meant to be lived, whole, present, and unmistakably yours. And so you trade away those parts of yourself, piece by piece, feeling safer with every transaction, even as something essential inside you begins to fade. The safety of belonging is often wrapped in rules. Some are spoken, but most are not. You learn that certain opinions are better left unsaid, for they disturb the peace. Certain ambitions should be softened, for they threaten the balance. Even your emotions, raw and unfiltered, must be carefully measured so they don't make others uncomfortable. Slowly, you begin to inhabit a kind of emotional and mental middle ground. Never too much, never too little, always adjusted to fit the space you occupy. Epictetus warned, "If you wish to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid." But the desire to belong makes us terrified of being misunderstood. We choose smoothness over honesty, acceptance over self-expression, and that choice, repeated often enough, reshapes the very core of who we are. What makes this cost so subtle is that it often feels like love. You tell yourself you're compromising because you care, because you're a good partner, a good friend, a good child. And sometimes, that's true. But the line between healthy compromise and self-erasure is razor thin, and the pull of belonging has a way of nudging you toward the latter without you ever noticing. One day, you realize you no longer say what you think unless it's safe. You've stopped chasing certain dreams because they don't align with the shared plan. You've become careful, measured, less spontaneous, not because you wanted to change, but because change threatened the approval you had worked so hard to secure. The price of belonging isn't paid in dramatic moments of betrayal. More often, it's paid in small, almost invisible installments. The joke you didn't make because you weren't sure how it would land. The truth you didn't speak because it might cause a ripple of conflict. The risk you didn't take because it would require explaining yourself to someone who wouldn't understand. Each of these seems minor in isolation, but together they weave a pattern. Over time, you begin to live not for your own clarity or authenticity, but for the stability of the group. You trade pieces of your individuality for a sense of security, believing that the more of yourself you give away, the more you'll belong. But if your thoughts are constantly adjusted to match the expectations of others, your soul will inevitably lose its own distinct color. To stay single, or even just to choose solitude when you need it, is to retain ownership of your thoughts, your desires, your essence, without the constant background negotiation. This isn't about isolation. It's about sovereignty. It's about knowing that every decision you make comes from your own center, not from a calculation of how it will be received. This isn't to say that connection is inherently dangerous. Love, friendship, and community can be powerful sources of growth and joy, but they only serve you if they allow your full self to be present. When belonging requires constant self-editing, it ceases to be connection and becomes a subtle form of control. And control, no matter how softly applied, will always limit your capacity to live as you truly are. Jung believed that individuation, the process of becoming whole, cannot happen when your sense of self is dependent on the approval of others. You cannot integrate the parts of you that you've hidden away to maintain your place in the group. To choose yourself over the comfort of belonging is not easy. It can mean standing apart, breaking unspoken rules, or letting go of relationships that cannot hold your truth. It can mean moments of loneliness that feel sharper than you expected. But it also means living without the weight of constant adjustment, without the slow erosion of your voice and your vision. And in that freedom, something remarkable happens. You begin to belong to yourself in a way no one can ever take away. The cost of belonging is real, but so is the reward of keeping your own life in your own hands. Staying single doesn't mean you reject love. It means you refuse to trade your essence for it. It means that when you do choose to belong, it will be on your terms, as your whole self, without shrinking to fit. Because belonging is sweetest when it doesn't come at the expense of who you are. And freedom, once claimed, makes every other kind of connection richer, deeper, and truer. When you strip away the constant hum of other people's voices, something unexpected rises in its place. At first, it's unsettling, a quiet that feels almost too loud. You notice thoughts you didn't realize were there, ideas that had been buried under conversations, obligations, and the steady pull of another's presence. Alone, there's no one to distract you. These thoughts surface with an intensity that can feel overwhelming, like a room you've avoided cleaning for years, suddenly flooded with a harsh, revealing light. Carl Jung once wrote, "Who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakes." Solitude forces that awakening. It asks you to turn inward, to look directly at what you've been avoiding. And while it may feel like discomfort at first, there's something else buried within it. Clarity. As the days pass, that clarity deepens. You begin to hear your own voice with more precision, without the constant negotiation of your thoughts to fit someone else's expectations. Your ideas stretch further, becoming bolder. You start following your mind down paths you might have dismissed before because they didn't align with a shared plan. The world inside you begins to expand, filling with details you couldn't see when you were too busy adapting to someone else's rhythm. This is the part people rarely mention when they speak of being alone, the way your mind sharpens when there is nothing to dilute it. At first, solitude can feel like a loss, especially if you've been conditioned to see it as an absence. No partner to share your day with, no one to consult before making a decision, no immediate echo of your words. But as you lean into it, you realize this absence has been misunderstood. What you've actually been given is space. Pure, unclaimed, unmeasured space. And space has a way of revealing the truth. Marcus Aurelius said, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." In solitude, that truth becomes undeniable. You stop outsourcing your validation, your direction, your worth. They begin to come from the inside out, and the power in that shift is hard to describe until you've felt it. The more time you spend in this space, the more it changes you. At first, you may fill the silence with noise, music, screams, conversations with anyone who will listen. But slowly, you start to let the silence be. You discover that not all thoughts need to be drowned out, that some of the discomfort you feel in stillness is simply the process of meeting yourself again. It's in that stillness that your desires become sharper. You realize which dreams are truly yours and which were inherited from someone else's vision for your life. You feel the pull toward things you had long forgotten mattered to you. This is when solitude begins to shift from uncomfortable to addictive, not because you want to avoid people, but because you've tasted the freedom of living without constant compromise. There is a peculiar energy that comes from being alone on your own terms. It is not the isolation born of rejection or loss. It is chosen, deliberate, and rooted in self-respect. The Stoics would see this as aligning with nature, living according to your own inner compass. You start to notice how much of your life before was built around reaction, reacting to someone else's mood, their needs, their plans. Now, your energy is directed toward creation. You are not managing another's emotions before you can explore your own. You are not tempering your excitement or holding back an idea because it might be misunderstood. In this space, time itself feels different. There is a stretch to it, an openness that allows for deeper work, deeper thought. You can pursue an idea until it's fully formed without being interrupted by the need to check in with someone else. You can start a project at midnight because you feel inspired without having to explain yourself. It's in these moments that you realize how much energy you once spent simply maintaining the balance of a shared life. That energy is now yours to invest where it matters most. Of course, solitude isn't a constant stream of inspiration. There are days when the quiet feels heavy, when you wish for the simple ease of another's presence. But even in those moments, you begin to understand that the stillness has meaning. It is shaping you, building your capacity to stand on your own, to sit with your own mind without running from it. Eventually, the space that solitude creates stops feeling like a void and starts feeling like home. You realize that the truest connections you'll ever have, with others, with the world, with your own work, are richer when they grow from this foundation of self-reliance. You no longer fear being alone because you have seen what can be built there. And once you've experienced the sharpness of thought, the clarity of vision, and the unfiltered pull of your own desires, you will protect that space fiercely. Not as a wall against the world, but as the ground on which you stand, steady and unshakable. Because when you belong fully to yourself, no connection can take that away, and no absence can strip you of it. From the earliest stories we are told, there runs a common thread. The promise that somewhere out there exists another person who will complete us. It's in our fairy tales, our songs, our movies. You are not whole, the story goes, until you find your other half. At first, this idea feels romantic, even comforting. It suggests that life's deepest fulfillment comes not from within, but from merging with another. But beneath that comforting surface lies a subtle, dangerous belief that on your own, you are incomplete. And when you accept that belief, you begin to live as though your very worth depends on someone else. This myth quietly shapes your decisions. If you believe you are incomplete, then every action is weighed against the hope of attracting or keeping another person. Your choices begin to orbit around the possibility of being chosen. You might adjust your ambitions so they don't threaten a relationship, or downplay parts of your personality that don't fit the image of a perfect partner. Over time, your identity becomes less about what feels true to you and more about what will secure a connection. This is not love. It is dependence disguised as devotion. And dependence, no matter how beautifully packaged, slowly erodes your individuality. Dependence is seductive because it offers a false sense of security. It tells you that as long as the relationship remains, you are safe. But that safety comes at a cost. You start to measure yourself not by your own standards, but by how well you fit into someone else's life. You ignore the quiet signals from within, the dissatisfaction, the suppressed curiosity, the unspoken dreams, because chasing them might disrupt the bond. Epictetus wrote, "If you want to be free, then wish for nothing that depends on others." Freedom cannot grow in the soil of dependence. It shrinks there, until one day you realize you've built your entire life on ground that can disappear at any moment. When you buy into the myth of incompleteness, relationships stop being choices and start becoming lifelines. The thought of losing the other person isn't just about emotional pain. It feels like losing a part of yourself. This is why people stay in situations that no longer nourish them, why they silence their instincts and ignore their needs. They believe that to leave would be to become less than whole. But the truth is, you were never half of anything. You were always an entire person, capable of love, creation, and purpose, all on your own. The wholeness you seek from another can only ever be built from within. It is worth asking where this belief came from. In part, it is cultural. Societies often idealize the couple, the family unit, as the highest form of personal achievement. Single life is framed as a waiting room, a temporary state you should aim to escape. Even our language reflects this bias. We talk of settling down, as if only in partnership can life find its true form. But this narrative omits the reality that a partnership is no guarantee of fulfillment, and being single is no sentence of lack. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself, "Very little is needed to make a happy life. It is all within yourself." The myth of incompleteness hides this truth, keeping us searching outward when the real work has always been inward. Breaking free from this myth doesn't mean rejecting relationships. It means approaching them from a place of self-sufficiency rather than need. When you no longer see yourself as a fragment waiting to be completed, love becomes a choice, not a dependency. You can give without fear of losing yourself, and you can receive without making it the source of your identity. This kind of love is richer because it's built between two whole people, each capable of standing alone. Jung understood this well. He believed true connection could only occur when both individuals had confronted their own inner worlds, rather than using each other to avoid that work. The challenge is that choosing wholeness can feel lonely at first. Without the immediate validation of a relationship, you must face yourself in full, your flaws, your strengths, your unrealized potential. That is the work most people avoid, which is why dependence is so tempting. But once you begin to build a life that feels complete on its own terms, something changes. The fear of being alone starts to fade. Your self-worth stops swinging with the moods of others. And the relationships you do form are not built to fill a void. They are built to share an abundance. The myth of incompleteness is powerful because it has been repeated so often it feels like truth. But the real truth is simpler and far more liberating. You are not half of anything. You are a whole, complex, capable being. And the more you live from that place, the less you will tolerate any connection that requires you to shrink. You will stop treating love as an antidote to your existence and start seeing it as a complement to a life already full. In that shift, dependence loses its hold, and your life stops being a search for a missing piece and starts being the creation of something complete, entirely on your own terms. Society has a way of making its preferences clear without ever speaking them outright. You see it in the way people celebrate certain milestones. Buying a house, getting married, having children. These are seen as markers of success, proof that you are on the right path. They make you predictable, and predictability is comforting to the collective. When you are part of a couple, people feel they know what comes next. Your life has a familiar shape. It's easier to understand, easier to categorize, easier to control. But step outside that pattern, live fully and unapologetically single, and suddenly, you become harder to define. Your next move isn't obvious. You don't fit neatly into the expected script. And that unpredictability makes people uneasy, because it signals a freedom that cannot be managed. The herd thrives on stability. It wants to know what to expect from you, and in return, it offers the safety of acceptance. But that acceptance comes with an unspoken agreement. Don't stray too far from the path. When you're coupled, that path is almost pre-written. Shared plans, mutual compromises, a rhythm that keeps you in step with the majority. There is nothing inherently wrong with that rhythm, unless it drowns out the beat of your own drum. The thriving single person doesn't just hear their own rhythm, they live by it. They make choices that don't require consensus. They move in ways that can't be easily predicted. And in a world built on conformity, that is a kind of power that both fascinates and threatens. The reason unpredictability is so potent is because it's rooted in autonomy. If no one can predict your next step, it means no one else is setting your direction. You are not following a script, you are writing your own. The herd may see this as instability, but for the outlier, it is freedom. Without the constant need to negotiate decisions with a partner, you can pivot when inspiration strikes. You can take risks without having to justify them. You can chase opportunities that make sense to no one but you, and that ability to act without compromise is a rare currency. Of course, the herd doesn't simply ignore the outlier. It often tries to pull them back in. Questions come disguised as concern. Don't you want someone to share your life with? Aren't you afraid of ending up alone? Beneath these questions is an assumption that a life lived outside the couple framework is less valuable, less complete. But these are the questions of people who measure a life by how well it mirrors the majority. They cannot see that solitude, when chosen, is not a lack. It is a luxury, a wide-open space where self-determination can flourish without interruption. The outlier knows this, and that knowledge becomes a shield against the subtle pressure to conform. What unsettles people most about the thriving single person is not their solitude, but their contentment within it. If you're alone and miserable, the herd feels validated. It proves their path is the better one. But when you are alone and thriving, you disrupt the narrative. You show that happiness and fulfillment are not exclusive to the couple's lane, and that makes others question the compromises they have made. Jung understood this discomfort, noting that the most intense conflicts, if overcome, leave behind a sense of security that is not easily disturbed. The thriving single person has faced the conflict of societal expectation head-on, and, in overcoming it, has found a calm the herd cannot quite replicate. Unpredictability also breeds resilience. When you are not dependent on another person to define your identity, you are less shaken by change. The herd fears disruption, but the outlier moves through change fluidly. They are used to navigating without a preset map. They know life can shift in an instant, and they have built themselves to adapt. This adaptability is another form of power, one that allows them to seize opportunities and weather challenges without losing their sense of self. In the end, the difference between the herd and the outlier isn't about relationships. It's about agency. The herd follows patterns laid out by others, finding safety in numbers. The outlier takes the risk of stepping off the path, knowing that while the terrain may be unpredictable, it is theirs alone to explore. And in claiming that risk, they gain something the herd often sacrifices: the right to live entirely on their own terms. The thriving single person understands that unpredictability is not chaos. It is potential. It is the openness to be shaped by choice rather than by default. They are not rejecting connection. They are rejecting the idea that connection must come at the cost of individuality. And in a world that constantly rewards predictability, the outlier's refusal to be easily defined is both a rebellion and a declaration. I belong to myself first. That kind of self-possession cannot be given, and it certainly cannot be taken. It is built, earned, and protected, and once you have it, you realize it is the rarest kind of power there is. Ideas are shy things. They rarely take root in rooms filled with chatter. constant movement, and the weight of expectation. They emerge in the still hours, when the world feels distant and nothing is pulling at your attention. There is an electricity in those moments, the long nights when you are lost in thought, the quiet mornings when you wake without obligation. In solitude, your mind roams without needing permission. It wanders into strange territories and stumbles upon connections it would never have made under the gaze of an audience. Carl Jung once said, "Solitude is for me a fount of healing which makes my life worth living." What he understood is that creation is not just about inspiration, it is about space. Without that space, the raw material of thought has no room to take shape. When you are alone, you can chase an idea without justifying why it matters. You can follow a thought into the depths of obsession without explaining yourself to another's logic. You can let it consume you for hours, days, even weeks, and no one is there to tell you to slow down. That freedom, to sink fully into your own process, is a rare gift in a world fixated on connection. It is in that freedom that the creative edge sharpens. Without compromise, without the subtle pressure to adjust your pace, your mind learns to stretch in ways that cannot happen in a crowd. Crowded spaces pull your attention outward. You become aware of others, of how your actions might be interpreted, of what is expected. While useful for collaboration, this awareness is poison to the kind of thought that needs to be unruly and untouched. Solitude removes the need for approval. You are no longer creating to be seen in a certain way. You are creating because something within you demands to be brought into existence. As Seneca noted, we must take a break from the world and withdraw into ourselves. This is not a withdrawal of avoidance, but an act of preservation, to protect the fragile beginning of an idea until it is strong enough to face the world. This same quiet that gives birth to an idea also allows you to hear yourself for the first time. When you step out of the constant exchange of emotions that comes with being closely tied to someone, something subtle but powerful begins to happen. At first, it is disorienting. You are used to checking the emotional temperature of another person before you even know your own. But when you remove yourself from that constant negotiation, the static starts to clear. You begin to realize just how much of what you have been feeling was never yours to begin with. The irritation you felt was the residue of their frustrations. The heaviness in your chest was something you absorbed trying to keep the peace. The Stoics believed our peace of mind depends not on events, but on the judgments we attach to them. Alone, those judgments are finally your own. You are left to feel what you feel, in full. And in that unmediated experience, you start to notice what truly excites you, not what you pretended to be excited about to match someone else's mood. Your emotional landscape stops being a shared space and becomes your own territory. Without the constant influx of another person's needs and moods, your nervous system begins to settle. The space left behind is not empty, it is breathable. Emotional independence does not mean you stop caring. It means you stop carrying others in ways that cost you yourself. And when you do reconnect, you do so from a place of groundedness, not entanglement. Joy itself changes. When you are alone, it becomes self-generated, steady, and less vulnerable to another's storm. This emotional detox is not always comfortable. You may feel the absence of another's presence as an emptiness. But if you resist the urge to fill the silence too quickly, you discover it was never emptiness at all. It was space waiting to be reclaimed by you. But when you choose to live on your own terms, the labels come quickly. Lonely, selfish, incomplete. These words are not really about you. They are about the discomfort your independence stirs in others. You have stepped outside the script. The social architecture loves dependence because it is stable. A dependent person is easier to guide, easier to keep in place. When you no longer need that structure to feel whole, you cannot be controlled in the same way. Your decisions are no longer dictated by the fear of being left out. So they call it loneliness, because they cannot imagine fulfillment without constant company. They call it selfishness, because you prioritize your own path over the comfort of conformity. They call it incomplete, because their idea of wholeness is built on the presence of another. This mislabeling is a form of social control, painting independence as something undesirable. That is why the choice to live freely is so radical. It is not a rejection of love, but the removal of need from the equation. To reach that point, you have to earn your sovereignty, and the price is never cheap. You must let go of things most people cling to, the shared plans that offer direction, the automatic affection that offers reassurance, the built-in companionship that quiets the weekends. These are comforting things, but they come with strings that can silently pull you away from yourself. True sovereignty means cutting some of those strings. Every choice is yours alone, and that freedom is both intoxicating and terrifying. There is no one to share the weight of a wrong decision, but there is also no one to hold you back when your vision is clear. As Epictetus wrote, "No man is free who is not master of himself." Solitude is the training ground for that mastery. You learn to be your own anchor, to generate your own reassurance, to sit with discomfort instead of reaching for a quick fix. And the reward for paying this price is a life that is unmistakably your own. It may not be easier, but it becomes yours in a way that nothing and no one can take from you. At first, being alone can feel like a space you are trying to fill. But if you stay with it long enough, the silence stops feeling like a punishment. It starts to feel like a strength. You wake up one morning and realize you no longer need someone to reassure you when doubt creeps in. You have learned to steady yourself. You have stopped outsourcing your stability. In the end, it comes down to this. Solitude gives you the room to hear yourself clearly, without interruption, without dilution. It allows you to build something before the world has a chance to tell you what it ought to be. And once you have felt that, the quiet, steady power of knowing you belong completely to yourself, you begin to guard it fiercely. Not because you want to shut the world out, but because you have seen how much more alive your work, your ideas, and your very self become when you give them the gift of being born in silence. There comes a quiet, piercing, and irreversible moment when you stop hoping the world will understand you. It arrives without drama, without an audience or applause. There is only a silence, the kind that settles deep in your bones when you finally realize no one is coming to fix it. No one is staying up at night, thinking about your pain. And in that silence, something ancient awakens. A strength that doesn't beg, doesn't explain, and doesn't need to be seen. That is the moment you stop performing and start becoming. Most of us carry a quiet fantasy that our suffering is visible, that if we just hurt enough, someone will step in. It's a soft, unspoken hope woven into us from a young age. If I am in pain, the world will care. But then, life happens. Pain is ignored. Tears go unnoticed. The phone remains silent. And you begin to see the illusion for what it is. Not a reflection of your worth, but of how consumed people are by their own chaos. Everyone is battling something you will never fully see, just as they will never fully see you. And if you build your identity on being seen, you will spend your life feeling invisible. That quiet ache of being overlooked isn't cruelty, it's reality. And painful as it is, that realization is the first step toward becoming free. Because once you stop expecting the world to respond to your pain, you stop waiting. You stop freezing your life in the hope that someone will notice you're stuck. You begin to move for reasons that have nothing to do with applause. When no one listens, something unexpected happens. You start listening to yourself, not to the surface voice that echoes what others expect, but to the quieter one underneath, the one you've ignored for so long. In the absence of validation, that inner silence grows roots. You begin to hear your own thoughts not as background noise, but as guidance. Self-reliance doesn't arrive in a burst of confidence. It arrives slowly, often disguised as loneliness. You wake up one day and realize no one is checking in. And instead of falling apart, you start building. You begin taking yourself seriously because you've grown tired of waiting for a permission that was never coming. With this, you take back a kind of freedom most people will never truly know. The Stoics understood this well. Epictetus taught that freedom is born when you control your own mind, when your peace no longer depends on things outside of yourself. A deep calm settles in you, the calm of knowing you can handle life without leaning on someone else's emotional scaffolding. You've been through the long nights of doubt, questioning if you were strong enough to stand alone. You have emerged on the other side, not untouched, but unbroken. You no longer fear the quiet because you've learned to hear your own voice in it. And that voice has become clearer and more trustworthy than all the noise of outside opinions. This changes your relationships, not by pushing people away, but by redefining why they're in your life. When you no longer seek someone to complete you, you start choosing people who expand you. Love and friendship cease to be about filling a void and become about sharing an abundance. As Jung believed, real connection can only happen between two whole individuals. When you have met yourself fully, you can finally meet others without the weight of unspoken need. Of course, this unshakable self is not without vulnerability. You still feel pain, disappointment, and longing, but they no longer destabilize you. You are not afraid of loss in the same way, because you know you will not lose yourself with it. You have sat in the quiet and found not emptiness, but a rich inner life that no one else could give you. There is a humility in this. You recognize that self-reliance is not isolation. You can accept help without feeling dependent. You can love without fear of losing your footing. You can let people come and go, because your foundation is no longer built on their presence. It is built on you. This is the paradox of true freedom. The more you belong to yourself, the more freely you can give yourself to others. Perhaps most profound is the way your sense of time changes. You no longer rush to fill your days to avoid being alone with your thoughts. You savor moments. An ordinary walk at dusk, a quiet meal, an evening with a book. These take on a richness. They are not placeholders. They are life itself. We live in a world that rewards exposure, a world that tempts you to turn every wound into a performance. But not all healing needs an audience. Some of the deepest transformations happen when no one is watching. There is a sacred power in becoming unexplainable, in being someone who no longer offers their pain as a currency for connection. When you stop broadcasting your wounds, you stop attracting those who are only there to observe the damage. And slowly, you begin to attract those who respect what you have built in silence. When you finally meet this version of yourself, you realize you were never truly incomplete. You were just obscured by noise, distraction, and dependence. And now that you have stripped that away, you see what was there all along. A self that is whole, steady, and deeply alive. That is the moment you become unshakable. And the self you have finally met is not fragile. It is the strongest thing you will ever stand on. In the end, the greatest freedom you will ever know is the moment you realize you are already whole. Protect that truth, live by it, and never let the world convince you otherwise. In the quiet act of guarding your energy, a profound clarity descends. You begin to see, with startling precision, how much of your life was spent on explanations that were never required. How much power was bled away, asking to be understood by those who lacked the depth to even understand themselves. You watch as the world applauds vulnerability, yet fails to whisper its most crucial secret, that true vulnerability is not exposure, but discernment. It is the wisdom of knowing when to speak and when to let silence hold your truth. It is choosing who is worthy of seeing the real you and who must be content with the surface. Your emotions do not require the world's validation to matter. Your pain does not need to be turned into art to justify its existence. You can carry your grief in silence. You can heal without a spectacle. You can mend without an audience. And when you do, something incredible happens. The silence you once feared no longer feels like abandonment. It feels like a return, a homecoming to yourself, to what is real. There is nothing wrong with expressing emotion, but when expression becomes a performance, it robs you of your power. Sovereignty is born in the moment you choose presence over performance, the moment you cease explaining yourself to feel safe and realize your peace was never fragile. It was forged in solitude. And when others can no longer predict you by your old emotional patterns, they begin to respect the depth they cannot access, not because you have grown cold, but because you have grown wise. You don't owe anyone a front row seat to your healing. You don't have to bleed in public to prove you are human. Some things are meant to be held close. Some truths are meant to be whispered only to the self. This isn't hiding. It's maturity. And in a world that glorifies noise, this kind of quiet becomes its own rebellion, its own sacred freedom. Rejection feels personal because it touches something primal, the need to belong, to be seen, to be accepted. But so often, what feels like rejection is simply redirection. You weren't dismissed for a lack of value. You were moved aside because your depth could not be digested by shallow eyes. Your self-containment was mistaken for coldness, your silence for absence. You were misunderstood not for a failure to express, but because you carry a frequency to which most are not attuned. That doesn't make you wrong. It makes you rare. The world, in its haste, often overlooks nuance, celebrating only what is easily labeled, consumed, and predicted. When you don't fit into those convenient boxes, you become an inconvenience, something to be discarded before it is ever truly explored. It's easy to internalize this as a personal flaw, to believe that if you were just louder, softer, or simpler, you would be accepted. But that is the trap. Believing your value lies in being legible to others. You are not made to shrink into their comprehension. As Carl Jung wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." There comes a point when you stop seeing rejection as loss and begin to see it as a clarifying light. Every person who overlooks you, every space that feels unwelcoming, reveals not a flaw in your worth, but a signpost showing where your energy does not belong. That insight is priceless. It saves you years of self-doubt and teaches you to invest only where you are valued, not merely tolerated. Once you learn this, you stop chasing explanations. You realize that not being chosen was the blessing that gave you back to yourself. A quiet revolution begins when you stop trying to be understood. You redirect the energy you once spent performing into building something that stands on its own. A body of work, a discipline, a life. You shift from a state of emotional scarcity to one of psychological sovereignty, where your existence is no longer up for debate. Your center of gravity moves inward. You are no longer moved by approval or rattled by dismissal. You become grounded. And grounded people are magnetic, not because they seek attention, but because they carry a profound stability in a world that spins too fast. People will still misread you. They will invent stories to make sense of your quiet, your ambition, your boundaries. Let them. You are not responsible for correcting every false narrative. As Marcus Aurelius said, "The opinion of 10,000 men is of no value if none of them know anything about the subject." You are the subject. They see only fragments. The moment you let go of the need to correct their noise, your focus sharpens. Your life is no longer built around being perceived correctly. It is built around being lived truthfully. There is immense peace in that. You no longer justify your silence or decode your boundaries. You simply live them as a natural extension of self-respect. Rejection becomes revelation. You see that it did not shrink you, it sculpted you. Every closed door clarified your path. Every silence refined your voice. What once felt like exile now feels like sacred space. Space to build, to breathe, to finally become not someone acceptable, but someone undeniable. In every life, there comes a quiet turning point. The version of you that once felt so essential, the one who needed approval, who bent to fit into spaces too small, begins to crumble. Not with a sudden crash, but a slow, undeniable erosion. You try to carry it a little longer, out of habit or fear, but it grows heavy, and finally begins to decay. This is not failure. It is evolution. The old mask no longer fits. You say less, but your words carry more weight. You don't perform your personality to make others comfortable. You simply stand like a mountain, still and watchful. Some will call you distant. What they truly sense is your withdrawal from an unspoken contract, the emotional labor you never agreed to perform. You are no longer addicted to being liked, and this unpredictability in someone who once conformed feels threatening. But that version of you needed to fall away so you could finally move freely. You didn't kill your old self. You outgrew it. This transformation requires no explanation. Those who understand will not ask, and those who don't were never meant to walk beside this new version of you. Here, you discover who respected your silence and who only knew you for your noise, who valued your essence and who merely loved your accessibility. You don't seek mirrors in others anymore. You have found your own reflection, and it is enough. People sense a calm that cannot be faked, for it was purchased at great cost, earned in the quiet dismantling of your former self, in the nights you doubted everything yet chose to continue. As Seneca said, every new beginning comes from some other beginning's end. This is a rebirth. And with time, it becomes undeniable, not because you announce it, but because you embody it. The old self was necessary. It learned the hard lessons and absorbed the wounds. You owe it nothing but gratitude and release. And now, in its place, you stand clearer, stronger, unapologetically whole. You have stopped being what the world told you to be. You have become who you were always meant to be. In a world enamored with appearances, a quiet restraint is an anomaly. And like all rare things, it holds a magnetic pull. You come to understand that true strength is not hidden, but silent, uninterested in the theater of performance. It is the quiet resolve of one who has met their fear and sat with it in the dark. One who has navigated the depths of their pain without making it a spectacle. They have no need for posturing, for they are not driven by insecurity. They have already stared into the abyss and returned, bearing no need to prove they survived. As Carl Jung once observed, a man who has not passed through the inferno of his passions has never overcome them. To complete such internal work is to be transformed. It alters the way you move through the world, the way you speak, and more profoundly, how often you choose not to. Your silence gains a voice of its own. You cease reacting to every passing opinion. you no longer feel compelled to defend every choice. You release the urge to explain yourself to those who are determined to misunderstand, not from a place of apathy, but from a profound sense of inner alignment. You learn a fundamental truth. If another cannot sense your value, no measure of words will ever grant them sight. And for those who can, no convincing is ever necessary, and so you conserve your energy. You speak only when the words matter, and when you do, people listen, not for your volume but for your precision. Your words are not scattered seeds, but carefully chosen fruit, earned through introspection. They are not uttered merely to be heard, but to express something real, something rooted in the very core of your being. There is a power in this detachment, not the cold kind that builds walls, but the self-contained kind that does not cling to outcomes. When you no longer rely on others to affirm your worth, you free them from the burden of carrying your identity, and you free yourself from the constant ache of needing to be liked, validated, or praised. This liberation makes you feel light, yet in the eyes of others you possess a certain gravity. Your self-possession becomes a palpable force, and it can unsettle those who still seek their reflection in the gazes of the crowd. For when they meet someone who doesn't need the audience, they are forced to confront the possibility that they are still living for it. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Waste no more time arguing about what a good person should be. Be one." This is the essence of commanding respect without words. You do not strive to be impressive. You simply embody what you value. The irony is that when you stop trying to impress, you often become unforgettable, not because you shouted, but because your silence had depth, your stillness had purpose. You were not trying to win the room. You were anchored in something far deeper than performance. People often mistake this detachment for disinterest, but true detachment is the highest form of clarity. It is the ability to engage without being consumed, to be present without being performative, to care without clinging. And that clarity speaks with more authority than charisma ever could. When a person cannot be shaken by judgment, nor baited into reaction, when they are unmoved by flattery or criticism alike, they begin to feel like an immovable force of nature. And we do not merely respect such forces, we adjust our own course around them. This is what separates the grounded from the attention-hungry. The grounded do not compete for the spotlight because they carry their own light within. They are not chasing the next compliment or a connection built on performance. They are building something quiet, enduring, something that does not crumble when the room falls silent or shift with the tides of public opinion. And people notice. They always do. In a culture that rewards the loud, the steady become a mystery. Those who feel no need to prove themselves begin to seem as if they have already proven the only thing that matters: self-mastery. There is no need to chase recognition when you move with intention, no need to explain your pace when you trust your own timing. The less you say, the more space you give others to feel who you are. And when your presence is built on depth, not display, it leaves an imprint, not because it was loud, but because it was real. As Epictetus advised, first say to yourself what you would be, and then do what you have to do. Quiet power is built upon this principle. You decide who you are, and then you live it, not for applause, but for alignment. So, if you have ever wondered why certain people command a room without asking for its attention, this is the reason. They do not chase it. They do not ask for it. They simply move in harmony with their own truth. And that kind of presence, born of inner stillness, will always speak louder than noise. It does not need to shout. It simply is. A strange and potent freedom arrives the moment you stop needing to be cared for, not because you have grown bitter or numb, but because you have finally outgrown the illusion that your strength depends on the gentleness of others. It is a subtle but permanent shift within. The world no longer holds the same power to shake you. Its silence does not unsettle you. Its applause does not seduce you. You begin to move from a different center of gravity, one that does not ask for permission, does not plead to be seen, and does not disintegrate when it is ignored. Herein lies the paradox. You only gain true power when you stop needing to be rescued, not from pain, but from the discomfort of standing alone in your own truth. For so long, we are taught that the care of others is a sign of our safety, that we must be heard to feel real, understood to feel valid, and held to feel whole. But there is a deeper truth. Power is not a gift bestowed by attention or love. It is something built in silence, brick by brick, with the choices you make when no one is watching. That is why, when you cease to crave the emotional sustenance of others, a remarkable alchemy occurs. You become your own source. In that moment, you realize you were never powerless, only waiting for permission to embody the strength you always possessed. Carl Jung once said, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." And that is where this power begins. It begins with acceptance, not only of your strengths, but of your fears, your shadows, your disappointments. You accept that perhaps you will never be fully understood, that no one may love you in the precise way you had always imagined. And rather than fighting this reality, you exhale. You stop resisting what is. You cease trying to control how others feel about you. And in that surrender, a new kind of control emerges, not over people or outcomes, but over yourself. You stop explaining things that need no explanation. You stop offering pieces of your soul in exchange for temporary comfort. You no longer make yourself smaller to be more digestible, or soften your voice to avoid tension. You simply stand in your life, unfolded, unedited, and let the world respond as it will. Some will draw closer, others will fall away, but none of it will alter the foundation of who you are, for you have become the sole arbiter of your worth. You have stopped outsourcing it. This does not mean you stop feeling, or that you build a fortress around your heart. It means you stop expecting external care to mend what only internal clarity can heal. You learn that peace is built in solitude and maintained by protecting that inner space. You no longer need to be mirrored in someone else's eyes to know that you are whole, for the mirror is now within you, and it does not distort. The fear of disconnection fades because the most vital connection, the one to yourself, is now unbreakable. This is what makes you strong, not cold or distant, but self-contained. People may come and go, you can love and be loved, but your foundation remains unshaken by their presence or their absence. This is not detachment from life. It is engagement on your own terms. This is what true autonomy feels like. You are no longer a guest in your own mind. You are the architect. As Marcus Aurelius wrote, you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. When your attention is no longer hooked by who notices you, who claps for you, or who stays, you redirect that energy inward. You begin to ask different questions, not, "Why did they treat me this way?" but rather, "What can I build from this?" You learn to turn pain into discipline, silence into strategy, and disappointment into design. You are no longer frozen, waiting for a wave of validation to carry you forward. You have become the current. This kind of power, this quiet, untouchable strength, is not handed to you. It is forged in the moment you stop waiting for the world to meet you, and instead meet yourself, right where you are. And from that meeting, something more honest arises. A self that is no longer edited for public consumption, a direction no longer swayed by the fear of being misunderstood. A life that is finally and completely your own. You become someone who moves with clarity, not desperation. Someone who can hold space for their own emotions without letting them bleed into every interaction. You do not crumble when the applause stops, because you never built your rhythm around the noise. You do not need to be followed to know you are on the right path. You know where you are going. And that is why others begin to feel your gravity. Not because you demand it, but precisely because you no longer need it. Do not mistake this shift for a loss. It is a return, a reclaiming. You have taken back the most vital power of all, the ability to guide yourself, to walk through fire without folding, to be unseen without disappearing, and to be misunderstood without abandoning yourself. That is when everything changes. Life begins to move in your favor, not because the world has finally understood you, but because you have finally stopped needing it to. In that space, you become unshakable, not because you were born that way, but because you chose it, again and again, until it became your truth. You do not need to be seen to be powerful. You do not need to be understood to be whole. The moment you stop waiting for the world to care is the moment you begin to shape yourself into something it cannot ignore.